this is Neil King for Random Acts of Cartooning, and I'm going to draw a Triceratops today. But first, okay, everybody, the influence for this episode is Why I Hate Saturn. This was one of my favorite books in the 90s. This came out in 1990, so a long time ago. But it was a really great example of somebody who had a unique vision, and he's worked in the industry for a long time, but this was like one of his first books, I believe. The parts that I loved about it, especially back then, a lot of independent artists, writers, all had lots of different styles, but he had this whole different feel in this graphic novel. It's limited color. Obviously, it's a black and white, but it's kind of a warm gray that's being used here. And you can see like a lot of the technique in here, whether there's a certain amount of markers or something going on here where you're going in, but then you see the softness. It could have been a lot of different things. And when I see this technique and how strong it is, it just reminds me of what you can do with formats. So this is almost like a storyboard, the way that they're having this in there, not the thought balloons or the word balloons. And the way he moves his camera and the character parts to this, it just was a really, to me, when I first read it, I was like, oh, this is kind of where comics could go. And whether it just became an experiment or not, I thought as a creator, being able to make something like this and just using some of the things that, it's all typeset. So it was just like a thing that you really thought that maybe you could do something like this. Just love all this like subtle use of the values in here, and lots of contrasty black and white images where all the characters kind of move through. To me, there's some weird movement between that Love and Rockets feel and this very super stylized, cartoony feeling that he has with his styles. I've seen him do many things after this. But I really just love everything about this book and the potential for format for comics. And for many years, I just thought that this was one of the great things to do. So when I do limited color illustrations and cartooning, I kind of think back to this episode or this graphic novel that he had done, and think about the potential for just showing value with very contrasty dark and light images. They're all just really great cartoonist. I'm sure it's been reprinted many times. Why I Hate Saturn. Okay, here I am again at the Natural History Museum in Philly. And there's just so many great things to draw there. Great lighting, too, for some of these things. So for this specific sketch, the day I went there, there were a bunch of things to do, but I'd like to try to do one that's maybe a limited color one like this. And the other one I had done with my regular Bic pen that I always bring. So I have two sketchbooks. So what I do first is I have this sketchbook, and it's a heavier watercolor. So it's like a 90-pound, I believe. And I'll just get my pencil, my trusty Ticonderoga pencil, and I'll just get in the very major shapes. I'm just focusing, obviously, on the head of this Triceratops. And so what I'm doing here is just laying that in, trying to get the proportions, because I'm having to deal with this, the middle of the page. I wanted it to cross over, not just to be on one. I didn't want to draw tiny. So I thought it'd be fun to go past the midpoint and just carry it over onto the other page too, so a spread that I would do. Now the good thing about this image is with the lighting that's there, it's some extreme contrast. So when you're drawing it, you just have to remind yourself where the shadows are happening with this specific piece. And so I keep looking up, back and forth to make sure that I have it all. So I'm kind of laying that in. It doesn't take that much longer than this. It was probably all of 2 or 3 minutes to do the sketch. So you can see lots of great texture on that, lots of great shade, the highlights and the shadows. So I'm going in with this this pen that has a waterproof ink in it, and I'm going to try to do a certain amount of detail. So for me, because I'm a cartoonist, I'm looking for textures mostly. And when I do my textures, it has a lot, it really gives me a sense of what that piece is. And I do like to draw these kind of things, skulls and rocks and things like that, because of the texture. So I'm using hatch lines and all just kind of marks that kind of differentiate each part of this skull into these different regions. So I probably go a certain darkness with the pen. Like I'm not going to blot in any really darks that I would do usually with if I had a brush. I would be a lot more aggressive with this kind of thing when I'm going through it. So when you're doing something like this, you just have to keep in mind what medium you're working in. So for me, the medium is going to be this watercolor on top. So that will carry more of the show. So I'm really just going to use a limited color with it, like a sepia value that I'll put on top of this line. So I might go in afterwards, after I do the wash, with the line to beef up the overall feel of this whole thing. But as you can see, I'm just kind of moving my way through it. These kind of sketches don't take a long time because with the watercolor, I'm not really trying to get every little, little edge or everything there. I'm just trying to keep reminding myself, where does this thing, where am I seeing on the inside of that skull? Where is that light hitting it? Where are the darkest areas? So with the pen, I'm going to be trying to just be all right, I can see it. This is kind of how it works around these horns, how far they're going in. And I'm hoping that, and I'm kind of, when you're drawing this way, and you've done a quick sketch, you're just hoping your proportions are right so that once you get into the actual sketch, that you're just going in and doing detail. So I might make each part of this part here, I might make this a little bit longer, a little bit shorter if I feel like when I'm looking back and forth that there's a difference. And because that can happen, especially when I'm drawing figures or doing things like that, I'll fix it on the pen edge, when I'm doing the pen part compared to just doing the pencils. So some people, when they do pencils, it's really a finish. But for me, it's just to mark out what I'm doing when I'm doing a piece like this, a watercolor piece, compared to doing just a pen and ink, or with my Bic pen as a sketch, where I'm really trying to, I'm doing finishes all along. So this part, I just know that I just see all these little bits of information. But knowing that this is in proportions, the horn section, this whole part in the front part of the head, compared to that kind of the back part, as long as I have those proportions pretty good, I think it's going to be, it'll be a nice, successful sketch, because you'll be able to recognize what I'm trying to do here. Triceratops, when you see this dinosaur, you're like, yes, a lot of people have seen, images of what people think they look. They may have seen this type of an image too if you've ever visited any of these kind of natural history museums, and Philly is a great one. Kids will recognize them right away because it's such a distinctive look for this specific dinosaur. So again, because of where that light is hitting the the skull, this is like exactly where I need to be able to say, all right, even though I know I'm going to come in here with watercolor, I want to beef up that area as I come around. And I'm just looking again, like when you start a sketch, sometimes you just miss stuff. So with this, I'm just like, here, I see this crack in this part, or, and as I go around, like what kind of real line do I need to be putting in something like this? Because sometimes, you want to, with the watercolor, you just want it to really shine in that specific piece. So as I'm going through it now, and it's weird too, like if I was sitting here without a camera on me, like I have my phone right above me on a tripod. So I'm kind of there, and I want you to be able to see this, the parts that I'm doing here. I think if I was without the phone, I would probably get a little closer back and forth to just see what I'm trying to see. Because sometimes, even about 5-10 feet away from it, you need to even get closer to be able to see the real little details that you wouldn't have seen. It's like when you draw a statue or something like that, you think you see everything until you're really observing it. And that's why you do these kinds of pieces. Even as cartoonists, it's good to be able to be forced to see the true details of something and not just make them up. Like I am so want to do. I do just like, I'm just like, hey, I've drawn enough things in my life that, dinosaurs, that I kind of would start filling things in. So with this, I'm really trying to force myself not to do that, which I will do very quickly. It's the same thing when I'm drawing figures or some type of thing. You want to find out like what they're wearing, if it's a clothing or something. You want to kind of see it and then focus in on that detail as much as you can. But it's a really nice day there at the museum. There weren't that many people around, some young kids with their parents. So I was just able to just kind of move through without having any real interruptions through this whole thing. But it's a really great museum, and I visit there. Like I try to go every couple months and just move around. As you can see, it's just it's this educational area too. Kids walking around. I feel like I've drawn that other skull before. A reminder: I am a working cartoonist. I do conventions. I make books. These are 3 of my kids' books. I have many more than this, but The Deep End, Spaghetti Eddie with the meatball eyes, and My Parents Are Ninjas. And those are really fun books for all ages. So check those out on my Amazon page. All kinds of crazy goings on in that kind of world. And I do all kinds of commissions. I do these conventions, like I say, and always doing commission work. So if you're interested in any of that, you can contact me through all of the links that I have on this video. All right, make sure you're doing that. Okay, so to finish this up, I have this portable watercolor set. And with this little watercolor brush that has an internal reservoir of water. So you can just push it in there. Instead of having, a separate thing for each one, you just go and as long as you have some paper towels or stuff around with you, you can go in there and get your color in. So I, as a cartoonist, and I'm not sure if a lot of cartoonists like this, but I definitely love limited color work. So when I'm doing something like this, I have to think of my light, mediums, and darks. So when you first establish that watercolor, it always to me seems so much darker than it will be at the end. But you really have to just kind of do a light wash. I haven't wet the paper first, so this is a wet on dry technique. So there's some subtlety to be able to go in there and get those in. So I'm just kind of moving around in there, trying to keep it light as I can, even though there's a part of me that just wants to get that real dark in there. I do think it's important to have variety when you're doing this kind of work. So when you're doing it, you just have to keep looking back and forth to see where that real shadow is, because it's fast. Like if you're just doing a limited color like this, I could probably do this part in all of like 4 or 5 minutes, 7 minutes, at the most. And so you just, every time you go a little bit darker, you start to see the variety of value that's in everything that you're drawing or that you perceive, however close you are or far away. So with this, you can see right away, I've kind of set in kind of a very light light and a kind of a medium in there, even though it seems dark at this point compared to the lightest light. But there, I could still go darker. And you saw the images of the skull. There's some extreme light right above it. So it's casting some pretty good shadows off of the horns. So I haven't gotten to that yet, but I'll be getting to it, where I have to establish it, and it goes right across that head. These are all just, every time I do this kind of a thing, I tend to want them to kind of look like this, like as much as I could probably match the color with the watercolor to the true color of this. I think that it's, to me, kind of dynamic when you see an image like this, and you see it with that line. And that's the graphic designer in me, is that I'm trying to make sure that when I'm doing this, there's enough contrast. And if you make that, a piece like this with a lot of healthy contrast, lights and darks, it can be a really nice piece without having to spend too much time with it. And it just reminds you every time you're doing something to look for that light source. And when you do something like this and realize, like you can see there, I've really put in a dark now, and how much different that is. So you have to move that into the rest of it to make it feel like that the light, as it comes out into the lightness, that you can see it. And now it makes it so much more rounded. With watercolor, as long as that you're still kind of seeing that line, it's great. It's a great effect, and it just bumps the piece up to another place. When you're doing this, it's starting to dry, and you're trying to remind yourself, you're like, I have to get this in, or I'll forget. Like what happens when that horn, the shadow goes across the rest of that skull. So that side of it is darker. And if you don't have it, the darkest dark, none of the other things are going to have as much impact when you're doing the overall piece. So, when I just put that part in, now I'm like, okay, now I'm adjusting all of the other parts. They're not going to have to be as light as they were. So you can see I'm bringing that over. Again, trying to be aggressive with those darks at the end, so that once I've done it, then I have to go back into the lights and the mediums and bump those up a little bit, so that leaving the lightest lights alone, but keeping these darks strong. And no matter what happens, once you have that variety, everything in the piece comes together so much better. It really gives you a sense of what something looks like in real life. And as a cartoonist, like, I just don't get a chance to do this kind of stuff. Most of the time, your ideas are all just in your head, and I could have a Triceratops in one of my stories, but if I don't have this experience going out and drawing something like this, or going out into a farm and drawing cows or drawing a horse, or I feel like all of the things that you do may lack in some type of a realism that you might want to bring to it, even if it's a specific stylized line. So remember, with this piece, there are lights coming from kind of two parts to it. So the darks are just, all in different places. So I'm really trying to put that together on that. So at the end, which is I'm getting pretty close to here, that's what I'm trying to see. And when you see it in the real world, that the thing about it is you also you're dealing with the background too, so it has a big contrast. So what I usually will do is I'll put a little bit of an indication of a background behind it, so the lightest lights will pop around around the piece. So from what I see here, I'm getting really close to the end. It's got an overall nice feel to it. And then I tend to just want to get a value in that background. And the great thing about this water brush is you just squeeze the water out, and then you're putting the pigment all over the place. So I'd like to see this kind of a thing in the background because it really pushes that the edges of the light compared to the darkest parts of the shadows. This is just to give a sense of the final sense of depth with this. So I'm pretty much done this piece, but it's I just want to put a little bit of the value in. And even after the video, I'll probably touch up this stuff afterwards. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Get over to a museum and make sure that you're trying to draw from life. And I hope to get back to another museum very quickly. I'm working on lots of stuff at home. But make sure that you're liking and subscribing. And we'll see you next time.